Well, it is Friday morning, and that means, of course, the weekend got here really, really fast. That's because the 3 day weekend that some of us had, it makes it feel like it just flies by. This weekend, though, is a very important weekend, as many of you probably know. We are looking at the 15th anniversary on Sunday of the 9/11 terrorist attacks on this country. This week has been a strange one in the sense some of you would have probably heard about the story about a monument that was erected in Owego, New York. That's in a place called Tioga, that is, county. It's not far from Binghamton, New York. I used to work in Binghamton, and I used to drive through Owego now and then. Beautiful little town. And they put up a monument that said on 9/11 this country was attacked by Islamic terrorists. And then, of course, the Muslims started whining, saying, "Oh, you can't say that. Oh, it's offensive." No, killing 3,000 of my countrymen is offensive. And they didn't do it in the name of Jesus Christ. They did it in the name of Allah, as they were screaming and shouting Allah Akbar as they were crashing planes and killing people by the thousands. That's what this weekend is all about. It's time for a memorial across the country, and it should be that way from now until the end of time, or as long as there is a USA. 8 minutes now after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There was a football game last night. The NFL opened its season with the Super Bowl combatants last night, and Brandon Marshall of the Denver Broncos decided to take a knee during the national anthem. This is begging a huge question of the NFL, which opens most of its schedule this Sunday on 9/11. There are already threats that the Seattle Seahawks players will do the same thing. In Seattle the other day, a professional women's soccer team decided to play the anthem before the players got out on the field in order to avoid any of that claptrap. We tend to lionize a great many sports figures, that is, athletes, and call them heroes, when it turns out so few of them actually are deserving of that role. I bring all of this up today because as we approach this Sunday, and if the NFL thinks it's going to allow a great deal of that to go on a hallowed day, then there is something truly wrong with America that can't be fixed. And yet, in all of this gloom and fear about where we're going, every once in a while you see a story and it just makes you sit back and realize what a true American is all about. I don't allow people to call up the radio show and read long-form prose or stories or articles or from books or anything else over the air because I used to have a fellow who would do that on one of my shows, and he'd call up and then he'd have to clear his throat every few seconds. And finally one day I said, there are tens of thousands of people listening. Why would you do that? But as Rush Limbaugh says, leave it to the pros. And I, terribly nearsighted fellow that I am, I'm not great at reading over the air as well because I tend sometimes to miss words and the like. But I'm going to take a few minutes this morning and I'm going to share this with you from the Wall Street Journal and the great writer Peggy Noonan. Peggy Noonan, one of the best writers probably in the last century in the United States and now currently into this century. And she's writing about a hero who gave his life that day 15 years ago. His name was Wells Crowther. And she begins it this way. What do I think about when I think about that day, the fireman who climbed the stairway to heaven with 50 to 60 pounds of gear? The people who called from windows on the world and said, "I just want to know I love you." The men on the plane who tried to take the cockpit of Flight 93 before it went down in a Pennsylvania field as they shouted, "Let's roll." And then she writes, I think about Wells Crowther, the man in the red bandana. He was 24, from Nyack, New York. He played lacrosse at Boston College, graduated, and got an internship at Sandler O'Neill, the investment bank. In 2 years, he was a junior associate for the trading desk. He worked in the South Tower of the World Trade Center on the 104th floor. When United Flight 175 hit the tower at 9:03 a.m., it came in at a tilt, ripping through floors 78 through 84. Many of those who never got out were on those floors or the ones above. Wells Crowther had already called his mother, Allison, and left a voicemail. "I want you to know that I'm okay." Only one stairwell was clear. He found it. Most people would have run for their lives, but Noonan says he started running for everyone else's. Wells was beloved, bright, joyous, grounded. Family was everything to him. He idolized his father, Jefferson. a banker and volunteer fireman. They went to the firehouse together when Wells was a child. Wells would clean the trucks, getting in close where no one else could fit. One Sunday when Wells was 7 or 8, his mother dressed him for church in his first suit. His father had a white handkerchief in his breast pocket. The little boy wanted one as well. Jefferson put one in Wells' front pocket and then took a colored one, and he put it in Wells' back pocket. One's for show, he said, the other's for blow. Noonan goes on to write, Wells kept it with him, a connection to his father, that from the mother, Allison Crowther. He carried a red bandana all his life. It was a talisman, but practical too. It could clean up a mess. When he'd take it from his pocket at Sandler O'Neill, they'd tease him. What are you, a farmer? They would ask. That is from Tom Rinaldi's lovely book, The Red Bandana, which came out this week. He'd tease back, with this bandana, I'm going to change the world. As Wells went down the stairwell, he saw what happened on the 78th floor sky lobby. People were trying to escape. They'd been waiting for elevators when the plane hit. It was carnage. Fire, smoke, bodies everywhere. A woman named Ling Young, a worker for the state tax department, sat on the floor, badly burned and in shock. From out of the murk she heard a man's voice. I found the stairs. Follow me. There was something she heard in the voice, an authority compelling her to follow, Mr. Rinaldi writes. Miss Young stood and she followed. She saw that the man was carrying a woman. 18 floors down, the air began to clear. He gently placed the woman down and told them both to continue walking. Then he turned and went back upstairs to help others. Judy Ween of Aon Corporation had also been in the 78th floor. Noonan writes, she too was badly injured, and she too heard the voice. Everyone who can stand now, stand now. If you can help others, do so. He guided her and others to the stairwell. Apparently Wells kept leading people down from the top floors to the lower ones, where they could make their way out. Then he'd go up to find more. No one knows how many. The fire department credits him with 5 saved lives. He never made it home. His family hoped and grieved, filled out forms. On the Friday after 9/11, Allison stood up from her desk, and suddenly she knew Wells was there, right behind her. She could feel his energy, his force. It was him. She didn't turn. She just said, thank you. She knew he was saying he was okay. After that, she didn't dare hope he'd be found alive because she knew he wouldn't. Noonan says they found him 6 months later in the lobby of the South Tower. He'd made it all the way down. He was found in an area with many firefighters' remains. It had been the FDNY command post. It was where Assistant Fire Chief Donald Burns was found. He and his men had probably helped evacuate thousands. Wells could have left and saved his own life, Noonan writes. They all could have, but they all stayed. He was helping, said his mother. The Crowthers never knew what he had done until Memorial Day weekend 2002. The New York Times carried a minute-by-minute report of what happened in the towers after the plane hit. Near the end, it said, a mysterious man appeared at one point, his mouth and nose covered with a red handkerchief. It mentioned Miss Young and Miss Ween. The Crowthers then sent them pictures of Wells. That was him, they said. Miss Ween had seen his face when he took the bandana from his face as the air cleared on the lower floors. Miss Young said, he saved my life. As a child, Wells Crowther had wanted to be a fireman. Few knew he'd decided to apply for the FDNY while he was still working at Sandler. After his father found his application, the department did something it had done only once in the 141 years since its founding. It made Wells an honorary member. Noonan goes on to write, his father sometimes felt guilt. Maybe taking him to the fire department so much when he was a kid was why Wells died. Allison, though, said no. That gave him, she said, the tools to be the fullest person he was that day. She thinks now of something else. The family spent the Labor Day weekend before 9/11 together at the house in Nyack. All weekend, said Allison, Wells was subdued, quiet, and introspective. Normally, he'd be charging around, playing basketball, but at one point he sat down with his mother in the living room, and he said, you know, Mom, I don't know what it is, but I know I'm meant to be part of something really big. I didn't get it, she said, who would get it, but he definitely sensed something was coming. Noonan asked Allison Crowther a hard question, embarrassing for a parent to answer. How do you make a hero? His mother paused. We tried to instill honesty, she said, the fearlessness he came with. My husband said he came with that hardware installed. He was this good-hearted little guy, very protective from an early age. Honesty was a big thing with us, and taking responsibility. It wasn't us, she was saying, it was him. It was Wells. The way I see it, Noonan writes, courage comes from love. There's a big unseen current of love that hums through the world, and some plug into it more than others, more deeply and surely, and they get more power from it. And it fills them with courage. She writes it makes everything possible. People see the fallen, beat-up world around them and ask, she writes, what can I do? Maybe be like Wells Crowther. Take your bandana and change the world. Peggy Noonan writing today in the Wall Street Journal, 2 days before 9/11 and 2 days before perhaps entire teams of National Football League players are expected to sit or kneel during the national anthem in protest. We've got about a minute before the break. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 48. We've got more coming up just following the break. Going to have some folks coming in from the South Central Community Action Program. They'll be joining us about 8:30 this morning, spending a few minutes with us. We're looking forward to a discussion, of course, about firearms between 9 and 9:30 this morning, right here on the program with Forrest Anderson from Washington Street Pawn. But in the meantime, I would hope that you would take a moment and you would think about the words from Noonan today, what she has written, and about the heroism of that young man who gave his life to save others on 9/11. And then think for a moment about Colin Kaepernick and Russell Wilson and Brandon Marshall and all of these other people that we spend hours and hours and hours of our time watching on television and debating their skills and their athletic ability and just how pretty they are. But then stand back and realize what it is that truly makes a hero in this country and who we should really, really honor this coming weekend. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. We've got more on the way. I want to remind people again, expecting to talk firearms and issues related to firearm safety and Second Amendment coming up just after the 9 o'clock news this morning with Forrest Anderson from Washington Street Pawn. Also, I wanted to mention my good friend Dr. Eric F. Jones this morning, who practices a holistic, systemic approach to wellness. That is an old-fashioned method that was tried and true for millennia. He's been doing this now for nearly a quarter of a century with master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing, naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual and cognitive self-regulation, and apathy. These help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. He's currently accepting new patients with evening and Saturday appointments available, and the number, 731-7178. You can find him as well on Facebook. The group name, Eric F. Jones, Ph.D., mental health and wellness therapist, and that's Eric with a C. We have a caller with us this morning. I'll get to the caller in just a moment, 736-0300. The line to reach us at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley, and you're on the air.
Bill, this morning on the Varney TV show, the New York police chief who was on duty when 9/11 occurred said how disgusted he is with the NFL and the players who won't respect our flag and anthem. He brought up the fact that right after 9/11, Pat Tillman, who had a cushy job with his Cardinals, joined the military and was killed. The NFL and the many players, all of them should be honoring Pat Tillman and show respect for our flag and our country.
Amen. Thank you. Pat Tillman took a pay cut of about $1.5 million in order to do that, and then ended up giving his life. And you can't even in this day and age get a stadium named after him because, we need a big stadium naming gift. So your heroism is irrelevant. On the other hand, if you're a big company that wants to throw some money around, you can get your name on a ballpark. You're up next. You're on the air at 826.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for sharing that heroic message this morning. It certainly reflects on the greatness of America and the greatness of a lot of heroes out there that go without any recognition. But let's remember it was the Saudis that were the pilots of these planes that brought down the towers. Those are the same ones that gave 25 million at least to Hillary's and Bill's Clinton Foundation, and wondering if she becomes the leader of this country. You see the duplicity of this whole thing, and but it's just, why didn't we go after the Saudis instead of going after Saddam Hussein? That was a question that's always been in my mind. We could have used that as an excuse to go over there and just take those oil fields and with probably very little resistance and take over that situation. But thank you for sharing that message this morning, and I think we need to reflect upon that more, the heroism. I mean, the Patriots, they sacrificed so much. Go back to Valley Forge. I mean, Washington was just totally physically, emotionally exhausted after the Revolutionary War, and yet he came back to the Constitutional Convention. He was one of, hundreds that real patriots, not past and present. And today, then we seemingly pay all of our recognition to people that won't even stand up and put their hand over their heart for the national anthem. That shows you how far this country's gone down the toilet.
Very true. And thank you much for the call in with the Saudis. I just read this morning where there is a new oil find, 2 billion barrels of oil at least in West Texas. We have so much in the way. We are truly blessed when it comes to energy resources in this country. We don't need these evil people. Do you realize all of the things that ISIS does, the torturing and the maiming and the killing? Saudis have been doing that for decades, and yet they're so-called allies. Well, I'm sorry, we don't they were allies because they were a good source of energy, but we don't need them anymore. We simply don't. And so now it's time to cut those ties and move away from all of those despicable people in that part of the world. The Saudis right now are funding, and they've been using that oil money for decades to fund these schools all across the United States, which are teaching this Wahhabi form of Islam, and it is essentially to raise up soldiers who eventually have a mission to destroy us. It's got to come to an end. We're going to dial it down for a few minutes. Coming up, we've got some folks dropping by from the South Central Community Action Program. They'll spend a few minutes with us. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 48. And I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning. Just quickly, Eric Erickson points out in one of his columns today at The Resurgent. He said, what is going to be interesting to see is which NFL players decide to do attention-grabbing stunts against the American flag or anthem on the same day terrorists around the world like to burn our flag and kill our citizens. And keep in mind the NFL rejected a request from the Dallas Cowboys to honor the dead police officers killed in the ambush this past summer. That was considered wrong by the NFL, and it was considered a political statement, and yet these overpaid, obnoxious jerks who'll be sitting down this weekend got absolutely no use for them.